Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. The areas that I'm passionate about and know a lot about and have gone deep with the guides and helped a lot of people around is this idea of using spiritual and energetic perspectives to support weight loss. In fact, I ended up creating an entire program called Shamanic Weight Loss, and if you would like to grab that, it's in my academy. You can check it out, and if you write me and remind me that I said that in this podcast, I'll give you a 35% discount. I won't remember it, so just whenever you listen to this and you decide, hey, I think I'd like to try that, just shoot me an email and I'll set you up, at least so long as I'm still offering the program. But as always, I want to create a podcast that ideally gives you some resources and some support. And a while back, I did a shamanic weight loss podcast with some information and ideas. And I just wanted to take this a step further and add in some new possibilities and information and perspectives that have just kind of arisen in the last few months. I've had a number of clients and people that I work with reach out to me about wanting to lose weight and get some energetic and guide help with that. So I always get all kinds of new cool information as I get to journey for people individually. So that's a wonderful, cool thing. And then I've kind of had my own aspects of this journey. So at the time of recording this, I'm 48, and my lifestyle practices have continued to upgrade in addition to just having overall fairly good health. And so as a result, the aging process is going right now in a way where I overall feel consistently year to year better than I ever have before in my body, which is super cool and reflects not only the physical practice, but also the mind, body, spirit, the whole combination. You know, one of the really big things that's different for me in my health, and this is something to pay attention to if weight loss is relevant for you, is I really keep my fight or flight non-activated. And when it does activate, I notice and I bring it back to baseline really quickly. And so there's just an enormous amount about how our bodies digest food and process calories and deal with the not so helpful things that are delicious, but you know, put a little bit more weight on our bodies. There's just this, and when I was using the word weight in that case, I was thinking weight like, oh, the liver has to work harder, the kidneys have to work harder, you know, a little bit more burden on the system to process. And when we're in non-stress state, we just have a lot bigger budget of what we can ask of our bodies in that way and still be at enough. You know, I'm quite fascinated with the idea of enough health, enough well-being, enough mental being friendly with yourself in your head, enough emotional health, enough friendship. There's, you know, kind of a society that has more. And I think having, you know, I've really gotten the appreciable happiness or good out of this, and it would be heroic efforts to get to another level, take a ton of energy, and not necessarily move the dial in an appreciable way that would matter. And I think that's a really good thing to pay attention to in terms of weight loss, as in all things. So for me, I noticed that as someone who is 48, seeing the very slight beginnings of some of the hormonal shifts that are on the horizon for me, I had no appreciable health changes or mood changes, but I did notice that eating the same number of calories appeared to result in weight gain, whereas previously there had been stability in terms of my weight. And while I was pretty peaceful and okay, I definitely carry a bit of extra weight, but my blood work is all really good and I'm relatively healthy and I'm interested in carrying less weight, but it hasn't been something that was actionable if I couldn't do it in parallel with other things that I was more committed to that were higher priorities. I'm like, okay, I'm constantly kind of looking at like, what could I do? Keeping track, having things not spin out. But when you take yourself out of sort of an equilibrium and into a weight loss cycle, it often just takes more overhead unless there's some kind of circumstance that naturally happens and works out for you in a good way. And so it wasn't something I was really committed to, but when I saw the number creeping up on the scale with pretty much the same amount of subjective eating, I was thinking like, okay, I'm gonna move this up the priority list a little bit. It's not going to be the main thing or a crisis intervention or a boot camp kind of thing, but I do want to find a way to make a shift so that, my weight comes back down to where it was and possibly over time even goes down beyond that. But at the very least that I'm sustaining equilibrium in this area. And meanwhile, like I said, I just had a number of people reach out and weight loss was something that was on their mind. So I always get really interested in taking counsel with the guides for people for what's particular for them and what's most helpful. But one of the things that really stood out to me in the way that some of my clients talk about this is how much shame and sense of personal failing there is around not having a weight that they have the number in their head it should be. And there's absolutely reality that there are good reasons that an embodiment experience could be easier and healthier and more aligned at a lower weight. And I don't want anyone to feel like that's the only knob or dial they can turn in terms of their health. My sister's a physical therapist, and one of the things I love about her is she's like, yeah, if somebody comes to me with knee pain, I'm not going to jump in and say, well, you really ought to lose weight. I'm going to say, okay, let's go in and start strengthening these muscles because there's a whole heck of a lot we can do if you're willing to do these exercises that will move the dial. And there's certainly people who aren't overweight who still have knee pain. So it's just kind of cool to look at it from a, sure, this is something that can help, but the better, more efficient intervention, I would argue, if you're in a lot of knee pain and having mobility issues, is to maybe start with a physical therapist, all things being equal, and then think about other things in the background. But one of the things that I want to invite you to question if this is something that you're dealing with or even something that your head gets loud about. So sometimes people who just have a lifestyle and a relationship with themselves that keeps them in equilibrium at a weight level can become a little bit judgy or self-congratulatory. And I want to emphasize that there are plenty of people who are just at a weight that really works for them, whose heads just don't get loud about other people's bodies in that way. My dearest friend is absolutely, she just doesn't particularly deal with addictive eating. She, has her body at a very healthy weight. And, we've been really close for a really long time. And she just doesn't have story that somebody's failing or doing something wrong if they're at a different weight. It's just not even remotely on the lens through which she sees the world. So I just want to mention this in passing because I think sometimes we can project onto other people that they have a story about us. And if somebody's really done their inner work on their own behalf or, with just the shadow work kind of thing, then they're not having their head get loud with a story about other people. Like there's a healthy psychological place. And I think sometimes there's a fear of being judged that can have us pull away in relationship for people. Oh, this person's going to think this or that about me. And ideally, as we get older and do more of our own work, we realize that isn't necessarily true. And on the rare occasions it's true, it says, more about them than us. I was listening to the documentary on Mary Tyler Moore, and, she was in an interview, and the interviewer was saying, wow, it seems like you were so high. People wanted you to fall on your face, and yet you had this success, and how cool is that? And she says, I don't think there are that many people. Like, I'm not that cynical about people. I think there are about 17 people who really want you to fall on your face, but most people I think are kind of, on your team or rooting for you. And I just loved her worldview of like, sure, that comes up, but I really see the good in people in general. And I think it's just nice to make generous assumptions about other people. A little bit of a digression, but I just wanted to throw that in there because the guides wanted it on this rambling discussion of this whole sticky widget that is weight loss. So one of the things the guides were really showing me for my clients is I had people from varying degrees come to me with this story of their lack of emotional or psychological health that therefore led to the extra weight. And I think there's an elegance to putting that off to the side, because I think there's a narrative, there's a cultural narrative that says, oh, I gained weight because I had this psychological issue or this emotional issue. And I think we could say that if you have this psychological issue or that emotional issue, you may need to be reckoning with that before you can put the energy and attention into revamping what you eat. And you may do that in parallel, and you may do that independently. And I just kind of think it's useful to look at it similarly to if you had a parent that was needing a lot of end-of-life care, or really young children, or you were in a really demanding season at work and you were working 12-hour days to meet a deadline. Those are all circumstances that make it really easy to swing out from your normal, healthier eating practices and exercise practices and meditation practices and all the kind of things you do that really, really work, that would be super useful right now in dealing with stress or crisis or extra demands on your time. And it's more complicated. And sometimes we just rely on the underlying health of our body to get us through the crunch time, and then we rebalance. It's not sustainable to be in crisis mode long term. And sometimes if it is a long-term crisis mode, we get really good at saying like, I just have to get the exercise I need because this, the effect of all the other things that I'm carrying is so much worse. And we get really, really committed. And everything is right and good with all of that, but there's just this invitation to look at this in this really unconventional way that says, what if whatever ails you psychologically and emotionally, wherever your personal growth is and what you're working with, what if, just for the sake of research and development, just go with me here, what if you tried the approach of assuming that it had nothing to do with your weight gain, just as a way to play with it? And, maybe there's something that gets revealed at some point that, it's useful, and, the shift of an emotional healing gives you more bandwidth to be present to other things. I think that's certainly true for me, but I just want to offer this invitation to kind of back up. So a lot of people who are looking at what's happening in America and other parts of the world as well, it's all a lot of us country-wise are going to carrying extra weight being more and more of a health concern for humans. And their discussion of it is, this isn't individual failing, this is environmental. When you see this kind of trend where there's this change over time, our environment has changed and therefore our bodies have changed, which is meaning that we have to use extra creativity and resourcefulness and sometimes money and sometimes, clever ways to overcome something that's harder because the system is working in a really particular way. I was listening to a podcast about Copenhagen, and even though the weather's terrible, how much bicycle culture they have. And the person who was interviewing was contrasting with the UK, and they were talking about how do you systemically get people to ride more bikes, and it just really has to do with setting it up where there are these wonderful safe bike lanes where, you don't have to pull into traffic. Like they're having this marvelous infrastructure. So often it's just a lot easier to get there. They don't have to have special clothes. Commuting on your bike is a normalized thing. And because of the attainability, you see, this enormous greater utilization of people riding their bikes places and getting exercise that they need, as opposed to the design of a lot of UK and American places where, you take your life into your hands if you go ride your bike and locally to where you live. In most cases, there's the whole load up the car and go somewhere to get to it. Your shop, especially in the US where we've segregated all these different things, the city planning that we did separated workplaces from home, so you probably can't just ride your bike easily to the store. There's all this infrastructure, which means you can ride your bike, but there's just so much more effort to obtain that outcome. So I did a quick Google search before I started recording this podcast, and I'm going to say that the numbers don't reflect everything they could because I just took the top Google result, which may or may not be true. I didn't deeply fact check it. And what is the number of what actually makes a normal, healthy, this is an appropriate weight? There's a lot of factors that go into that, so I'm not sure the tables are as useful as that. But that being said, quick Google search tells me that 33% of women are normal or underweight, according to, medical model, and 25% of men are normal or underweight. And so when we look at that, even if, there are different interpretations and ways of looking at the data, and maybe the number moves to a larger percentage. I feel that there's a larger percentage of people whose weight is just fine that aren't represented in those numbers. But I would just want to kind of shine a light on living in a culture that is, especially for women, but also to some degree for men, so shaming about weight and extra pounds. And there's so much status, which our brains get rewards for, and social, pressure. People will literally yell horrible things out the window to overweight people. There's so much intensity and shaming and pressure and messages and so much money and diet products and programs, and we're doing these weight reduction surgeries and have all of these pills and supplements. There's so much that goes into that. Like if we look at the pressure and the narrative and the money in the industry, there's so much that goes into this notion that people should lose weight, and the fact that it's hard to do is reflected in most people don't. Most people are not successful at being the weight that the medical model would say is most optimal. And this is with people who, in many cases, have worked really hard at it. They've joined programs, they've downloaded apps, they've counted calories, they've just worked with all of these different systems and programs and approaches and possibilities. And I think the takeaway from this that is really useful, it's not that it's insurmountable. I absolutely, for me, I made some adjustments. I'm going to talk about those, and I think I'll run this experiment. I think I'll run that experiment. I'm not down with postponing dealing with the fact that my weight is going up. I was totally down with postponing, my weight is this at the level of fact, and it's not a huge priority to make that number smaller right now if it takes a lot of effort. But I was more committed to I don't want it to keep going up. I'm ready to stop the increase and bring it back down to the previous place it was. So I put more attention on it, and have been having good results. The number is moving down, and it's moving down with lifestyle changes and an approach that feels congruent and good to me and doesn't have me fighting tooth and nail with myself. And I'll talk more about that. But What I want to offer is kind of sweeping aside this notion that it's a personal failing or you have these emotional or psychological issues, that if we just swept those off the table and just took it as it is very complicated in the modern era to be at an appropriate, according to the medical model, weight. And just off to the side, I'm not saying people should lose weight or that you can't be healthy at any weight. I know there's a lot of ideas of this, but I want the number to go down. I talk to people who want the number to go down. So from that perspective, I think it's just really useful to say this is a frigging hard thing. It is very difficult in the modern era based on the evidence of how much money we spend, how much effort we spend, how often we think about it, how much we talk about it, how many messages we're inundated with that are hitting our social standards within the tribe circuitry, this old primal, here's who you should be in the tribe circuitry to get us to do the thing. It's legitimately hard at the level of fact for most people most of the time to be at a healthy weight because there's such a small percentage of people in the US who are identified as being at that appropriate weight. And we just don't know how many of the people who end up in that category are really have their fingernails dug in, are really fighting with themselves and monitoring and, not necessarily having a quality of life experience with being at that weight. And so I just think there's such grace to the mindset shift that lets go of any kind of idea that you are failing or there's something wrong or you're unhealthy emotionally or psychologically, and just say, of course, like everyone, there's stuff I'm still working with, and this is hard at the level of fact, and I'm committed to figuring it out. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know how I'm going to wrangle myself. It's a really hard problem that people solve. Similarly, calming the fight or flight is a really hard problem because there's so much that activates it in the food that we eat, in the environment we're in the stimulation of Facebook. There's just a ton of things that the blue light we see at night, there's so much that winds us up, and we really have to put energy into a secret sauce to overcome our environment in order to have a different, much more advantageous, much healthier outcome. And if we approach it that way, we can say, okay, I don't know how this is going to go. I went to college and got my engineering degree. It was really hard. And there were a couple of classes where I'm like, I'm just not getting this. I do not know how to figure out the information that they're teaching. It's not making sense to me. Engineering professors, by the way, are not great people. I also minored in literature and women's studies, and liberal arts professors are amazing and heart-connected and committed to transmission of really neat ideas and holding a container where we can grow and explore. Engineering profs are like, oh, price of admission for doing my research. I have to stand up and teach these idiots. You get the UCSD professors and they're just so much smarter than undergrad engineering students. And we're not idiots, but, it was kind of, so many of them were like, I guess there's no help for it. I'll just go endure this experience. So there were lectures and such, but a lot of times they, were through heavy accents and with people lacking in any kind of charisma or storytelling, so it's just not doing you any favors for really being able to force your, mind to be in the engagement with the material. And I ended up going out and having a friend who had an advanced degree in math. And I'm like, I don't get this. And he's like, well, cool, I'll tutor you. And he sat down with me and worked it through, and I had a connection to him, and he was, just a really compassionate, good friend, and it really helped me out. So in doing this hard thing of getting an engineering degree, I worked really hard for that. I am smart, and I still work tremendously hard because everybody else in the program was smart too. And I got there. And so we may with weight loss say, this is a hard problem to solve. It's going to take a lot of creativity, research and development, going back over my results and seeing, okay, that didn't work. What do I want to try next? Looking at new research, new possibilities, learning a bunch about the subject, trying things on, running experiments, reviewing the results, deciding on the next experiment we want to run. And that's all just really complicated in a way, but if we have a lot of negative emotions about ourselves, if we're making ourselves bad and wrong that we carry this extra weight, it so destroys our ability to be in the curiosity and the brainstorming. We don't want to think about this thing. We push it away. And the more we push things away and we aren't present with ourselves, the more this other part of us that has this other agenda can run the show. So if you've listened to any amount of what I have to say, I have a lot to say on the instincts. And one of the things that's true about the instincts is a lot of our food hacks the instincts such that we eat things that are not good for us, that the instincts are absolutely convinced are life-saving and super important because they don't know that we're hunter-gatherer people. They don't know that we have all this crazy processed food that hacks our brain chemistry. And so the crazy thing about the instincts is we can have enormous tension in our body by not binge eating a bag of chips or a box of cookies or the stale donut later in the afternoon. There literally can be this tension in our body because our instincts are activated and they think that we're doing this life-threatening thing. And we have this feedback loop where we eat the thing and our body gives us all this happy chemistry, this rush of biological rewards that is amplified beyond anything our ancestors ever dealt with because of the processed food, because of how much sugar hacks it instead of just like the sweetness of summer fruit that cued us to eat more, so we would put on extra weight so we wouldn't die in the winter. And the women who did that, shiny hair is still like the number one sexual attractor because it meant the woman had enough body fat to carry a child to term. So the hunter-gatherer dudes who didn't really care about shiny hair may have had marvelous relationships, but they didn't result in there being babies, so they didn't become our many times great-grandfathers. So all of this is to say we've just been bred and bred and bred and bred to crave sugar, to crave fat, to crave salt, to binge eat it if it's available, and we're having to override something that our biology thinks is life-threatening. And meanwhile, we have all these biological circuits woven into the brain that say social approval is super important for survival. A social rejection can register in a lot of the same places in the brain as physical pain. We have a lot of not good feeling chemistry if we get rejected, even by somebody we don't care about. And, we can get the fear of rejection because it literally subjectively hurts when we get rejected. And so our brains are scooping up all these crazy messages, a lot of which come through advertising, about how to be pleasing and avoid displeasing and what will give us more social capital and status, because status really mattered in the tribe. The distribution of food, the decision making, the control over your life, the higher your status in tribal society, the better your outcomes and the better your children's outcomes. And so there's a part of our brain that, really wants us to suck up to high status people and try to raise our own status as much as possible. There's a great book on this called something like Popular, The Power of Likability in a Status-Obsessed Society, and it just does such a cool job of breaking down especially the teenage brain, but to some degree the adult brain, and how it reckons with all these crazy things. But one of the things we all know, male or female, being within certain parameters of weight, even if they take you down to the, below healthy weight side, medically speaking, has a lot of social capital. There's a lot of social status. So these instincts can simultaneously be hammering on you and super upset that you aren't binge eating donuts and creating the tension that creates the mental loop that's criticizing you constantly for not losing weight. And if we look at this as just a biological system that is hardwired into us rather than a personal failing, it helps us reckon with it. And the more we download the Calm app and work with it, or take a walk in the forest, or, do whatever practices are really our secret sauce for calming the fight or flight. It doesn't mean those messages won't be there, but they won't be screaming at us so loudly. So to go in, I know I said I'd share what happens to be the thing that I'm working with right now in my geekiness of like, how do I want to work with this? So one of the constraints, one of the things that's cool about this time in my life is I am getting all the cardio exercise I need. I'm actually even above the minimum, and I'm doing it really sustainably and without arguing with myself. There's this program I get a huge kick out of called Supernatural, that you get to beat up balloons in virtual reality and be in beautiful locations throughout the world, and it's just super attainable. I can jump in and do the workout. It's really worked for me. It's worked for me for several years, and that's awesome. So when I was going into this question, I'm like, wow, I really want to arrest the upward movement of my weight, which I really think is just a little bit of a hormonal shift. The same calories result in a different outcome at the age that I am. And I also had a little bit of an uptick in the amount of sugar I was eating. There were some stressful events, and I keep myself on a quote unquote budget for sugar because I know how much it affects my health if it really swings out. But I was, like maxing out my sugar budget every day, and I wasn't feeling horrible, but, I think that was factoring in. So I know that the whole thing where you write down everything you eat and you count and budget every calorie is a thing that works, but to me it's so clunky and so cumbersome, and I really don't like it. So I had that in my back pocket. Like, if I can't find a, solution, I could do this. I could get a coach of somebody who, would be involved with me in troubleshooting the process. I certainly believe in getting help from other people, But I happened to read an NPR article that had just cutting edge research found that there was similar results between people who did intermittent fasting and limited their food intake between the hours of noon and 8 p.m. That's arbitrary. It was about the 8 hours, so that can be adjusted. And they got similar results to people who calorie counted and cut their calories by 25%. And I already was doing a certain amount of intermittent fasting. Was trying to do at least 12 hours without eating anything because of, not even for weight control, but just related to a lot of really good health benefits. It worked really well for my body. I gave up midnight snacks and waking up in the night hungry, and my hunger cues reset. So, I don't get that hungry in the night, which is awesome. And so I was like, I could shorten those hours and give it a try. And my body happens to be very amenable to that. And I'm like, cool, that's awesome. I like this so much better. And I love that there's a study that just said, this can really get results. Another thing I listened to was a podcast by Dr. Chatterjee. He has the Feel Better, Live More podcast, which I love. And he had someone on there talking about uric acid, how much we get from sugar and how much inflammation that causes, and specifically inflammation in the brain that reduces impulse control. So my less impulse control over eating daily sugar was this feedback loop. It wasn't like anything in my psychological or emotional health had changed. It was just a biological shift where I was eating more sugar, and then there was more inflammation in my system, and it affects the amygdala. You should listen to the podcast. He explains it way better than I'm, relaying it secondhand. But the gist of it was, our adult in the room is reduced in effectiveness, so the self-efficacy takes a lot more willpower, and it's a lot harder. So when the part of us says, I want the ice cream, I want the ice cream, I want the ice cream, it's just kind of like a little child, and you have children who are just constantly making the bid, even though they know they're going to get a no. Could I get a candy bar? Nope. And then they chill and they move on because there's a consistent rule. But if they think they might, they can escalate indefinitely to, absolutely tantruming in order to have the thing that they really want. And I think that that's just a reality of kind of how that tension arises. So your secret sauce might look different. You might calm the fight or flight, so the tension in your body trying to compel you to eat some of these really rich, high caloric density foods was at a more manageable level. Or you can put more attention on it. So you're like, all right, I'm under a lot of stress, so this is going to be just way darn loud. So I need to really put energy into an infrastructure. And, it might be like, okay, I'm going to get rid of all the treats in the house and I'm going to cut up vegetables ahead of time and, all of these kind of things. But thinking of it as just, this is hard at the level of facts. So of course I would need to put effort in. It's not a personal failing. For me, I know my body does fine with turmeric, and I'm like, okay, well, if I bring down the inflammation, the self-efficacy will be easier. So I think I'll order some fresh turmeric supplements to bring down the inflammation so my brain chills out a little, so I have more self-efficacy, and then I'll cut back on the sugar because it's not doing me any favors on a lot of different levels. And I really see that. And I'm not at zero. I'm not at, absolutely no sugar will cross my lips, but I pretty much was able to put down the amount that I was eating pretty much overnight. Like, hey, we're just not doing that right now. It's not working so well, without a lot of struggle or battle or white knuckling it, which is part of my goal. There are sometimes when we just really, really need to do that, where, we really need to go to the mat with a part of us that has just gotten into a cycle that is putting our health on a downward spiral. But for me, again, going back to that life is full, how can I do this more elegantly? And that's where the shorter window of eating time for me personally was very attainable in a way that writing down every calorie and keeping track of the numbers, it just costs a lot and I don't like it, and I have to overcome a lot of aversion to make myself do the thing. Sure, it works, but I'm much more interested in finding a sustainable system where I don't have to struggle with myself. So that's where I'm really geeky. I'm like, okay, let me learn about tiny habits. Let me pick just a couple of goals and shifts to make. But in doing this, coming at it with the mindset, whether we're talking about exercise or, being able to sit your butt in a chair and do a job search when you need to, or whatever it is, recognizing that they're just really good reasons. They're good reasons that this is really hard. We have an incredibly potent instinct system that is pushing us to overeat. And now that we have secure access to food, this has become a problem. And it's a very new problem. It's just not something that many of our ancestors had to reckon with. And so we're still figuring it out. And we, at the level of fact, have systems that are making it harder. If the numbers rise, that means the systemic, people haven't gotten, like we're still the same people. We just have an environment that's producing a different result. And that makes it uphill. It means we have to use a lot more of our energy to not be swept along by our environment. So again, going back to that biking analogy, for most people in the US who want to go for a bike ride, there's a lot more that has to go into it than someone in Copenhagen who, just naturally commutes to work because they've just set it up where you get there faster and it's cheaper and it's easier and it feels better, and there are these beautiful paths and you don't have to worry about dodging cars because you have your own lane, and it's all woven in. So there's not that somehow Americans are more innately lazy than folks in Denmark. It's just that systems make a difference. So what I want to leave you with, I have some things that are bringing the number down on the scale, which is great. I interrupted most of my sugar consumption, and I've worked with that over the years. So it wasn't like a real going to the mat with myself, kind of thing. I have practice for, setting it down and easing up on that. And it's not any kind of declaration of this is never again going to be something I enjoy. It's just right now, okay, my body shifted a little. I need to keep up leveling. And I, interrupted my snacking. And the cool thing about, trying to eat it, for me, it's about 9 hours. They say 8 hours, but I'm like, it kind of ends up being 9 hours. If I'm saying we're going to wait until, this particular meal that we've planned, it just isn't an insurmountable amount of time. It's an hour or two, which is helpful for the snacking. And one of the things I've done, I haven't done it yet this time because I've been able to take some turmeric, ease up on the sugar, have self-efficacy with not having to fight with myself, make a good shift. But, there have been times when I've moved my favorite chocolate-covered almonds or things that call to me into a different cupboard to just interrupt the cycle of grabbing them on the way by. I work from home, and between my desk and the place that I go sit to do shamanic journeys, I walk by the kitchen. And so there's a lot of grazing on the way, which if I'm not being present, my instincts want me to do. They're literally this force that's trying to override. And so that's where I'm putting systems in place so that I'm not having to focus so much energy, which is something that I like. I'm not only trying to solve the problem of, how do I arrest the upward number of where my weight's going, but also bring it down. I am trying to solve that problem, but I'm trying to solve it in a holistic lifestyle way where I don't have to fight with myself tremendously. I don't have to have this huge struggle. I don't have to have it be something that takes up so much of my time, and that's where the exercise, I'm always looking for if I absolutely need to fight with myself and be miserable and do it anyway, sometimes that's just the way of it, but it's a lot more sustainable if I, have my strength exercises be like, okay, we're just going to do these 3 strength exercises in the kitchen while my coffee brews, and I'll be in the habit of that. And 3 strength training exercises, some squats, some push-ups on the counter. Dr. Chatterjee has a whole list of suggestions on this. I just don't have enough aversion to really fight with myself over it. So I just knock it out. And then, we also get chemistry rewards for checking an item off a list. So you can set it as a goal. They have these great apps where they're like, here are your goals. And I recommend not putting too many in, but I'm like, yay, I did the thing. I get to make a check mark with something that took 5 minutes. Hooray. That's kind of fun because, we get the rewards. So I know there's a lot here. A lot of this is just if you can put aside shame and self-judgment and get into your curiosity and your brainstorming and, where could I learn new things? Like being really geeky about hey, what's the cutting edge knowledge? Because lots of people are studying, how do we set people up to have a healthy lifestyle, because a healthy lifestyle, a lot of us are just full with a whole bunch of other things. I'm the sole source of income for myself. I'm pulled in that way, and there's just a lot that we're all carrying and needing to get up to and adulting and things we're accomplishing. So I think that our systems and strategies need to have a lot of ease with them. And putting the time and attention on the project of creating an infrastructure is important. Writing down the experiment that you're running, I think, is really useful. Okay, I'm going to try to do this. Okay, I'm going to check back with myself in 5 days, and then I'll see, okay, I didn't accomplish this goal. Is there something else I could have done? Maybe I need to move the treats somewhere else. Maybe I need to throw them out. Maybe I need to, like we can go back to the drawing board, oh, wow, my kids really want these treats and I'm not prepared to take away the moderation. I'll let them hide them somewhere where I won't be able to find them, but I'm not restocking for X amount of time. I mean, there's just so much creativity we can bring. But when it's a shame and a personal failing, we shy away from wanting to get present with the problem because there's so much pain and emotional legacy. And then we're not getting our executive brain going like, wow, this is a sticky wicket. It is super complicated to, sustain the weight that I would prefer to be at. How do I know? Because so many people care so much about this and they're struggling so much. So that tells me it's just hard at the level of fact. It's not insurmountable. We all do hard things. People keep children alive. People get advanced degrees. People run marathons. There are all these places where we can we can do hard, complicated things. It's just that if we go in kind of in the like, all right, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to find a strategy. I'm going to experiment with it. I'm going to check my results. And then I'm going to update and refine my strategy based on what is and isn't working, based on the data and feedback. My first couple of years of college were really vibrant in terms of social development and connection. And having been the queen of the nerds, I was academic decathlete 2 years running in high school, which meant that of the nerdy kids who thought that spending their time competing with studying extra, I didn't win every category, but overall I was the nerdiest of the nerds. I got to college and, started really learning. I was incredibly shy and incredibly socially awkward. And I just had this crucible to really explore. And so I got a lot of C's my first couple of years. I cut a lot of classes, in order to have other explorations. And I have no regrets about that. There was a lot of stress, but eventually I got a D in one of my engineering classes because I cut it too much and it wasn't something that what I already knew built on. I wasn't naturally good at the subject. So that was really good feedback. And after that, I modified what I was putting into getting the degree. So my upper division classes have mostly A's and, some B's. And I just realized the amount of energy that I needed to put in order for that not to happen. And so it was just feedback, and I was, of course, very upset at the time and shame and, all the things that I was reckoning with. But, as an adult, it's an ability to just look back and say, yeah, getting that degree was hard and there was research and development. And when I realized my strategy wasn't working to something I was committed to, which was not failing college, I pivoted. I made different choices and I got different results. And I just think the more we can have that neutrality of like, oh, here's an interesting piece of research. Let me try this. What if I up the amount of water I'm drinking? What if I, give up snacking? What if I try intermittent fasting? What if I, one of the strategies I have is I get a CSA box, which is community supported agriculture. So it's this massive box of fruits and vegetables. And I just try my best to eat my way through, especially the veggies, because the biodiversity and the way that supports gut health and the vitamins and the minerals are all really great. And, with so much calorie counting, we're often trying not to eat things. And so, for me, finding the vegetables that I find palatable, they're ones that I give away, but the ones that I like, I try to prepare. And then, when I'm like, I'm bored, I want to eat something, there's, a slice of cucumber available. I could, go to town on cucumber or have a couple carrot sticks or something along those lines. So again, it's giving yourself the grace that this is hard, figuring out how most elegantly to apply the attention that it needs, knowing that you may not be able to solve it overnight, and then running experiments, checking your results, and then launching a new experiment, I think is a really good way to approach this. So I hope there's something in here. We've researched it so much. There's all sorts of new data. And if you don't have a lot of shame, you can be excited. Like I was excited to read that NPR article. I'm like, oh, this could work for me. I really like this. And it's evidence-based because it's worked for other people. How cool. I'm going to experiment with that. And I think that there's just more availability to get our brain online, finding not only a solution, but an elegant, holistic, kind, balanced with the rest of your life kind of solution to this area if it's something that is relevant and important to you. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.